Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Budget Day live stream. So lots to talk about from the budget, lots of other things going on as well around the world, and a few things to talk about our election preparations as well. So thank you for joining us this evening. Do comment away. We haven't got anyone else joining the live stream tonight, so I'll be able to get to more comments than usual. We'll have some special guests from next week onwards, I would imagine, but lots to talk about from the budget today. So we'll get to the budget a bit later. A few little warm-up stories before we get there. How about this one? I don't know if you saw this. David Williams. I mean, it's quite a tedious string of stories, isn't it, of various public figures behaving inappropriately in various ways. This is David Williams' inappropriate behavior towards women. It was interesting to see him coming up because years ago when I was teaching, one of his books, The Boy in the Dress, was sitting in a library in the junior school, in the school I worked in. And I just happened to be sitting there one day, just saw it on the shelf and thought, what on earth is this? Boy in the Dress. And this was before transgenderism had really gone crazy in Britain. So I picked this book up, read through it, and I won't summarize the story. I mean, it's basically about a boy who starts wearing a dress. And then his headmaster gives him a really hard time. Then at the end, he realized the headmaster is also a transvestite and dresses up as a woman at the weekend, so it's exposed to be a total hypocrite. And then everyone realizes it's just great that the boy wears a dress. And then I think he wears a dress for a football match, and all the other players on his team wear a dress as well in solidarity. Oh, I can't remember. I mean, just total nonsense. So basically, it was the very early stage of promoting transgenderism to children. Basically, so I saw this book, I thought, whoa, what's going on here? So I wrote an article about it, saying basically, this is not good. And it was published by the Solar Center for Public Christianity that I was involved in at the time. So this went online. Someone read it, and my name was on, obviously, and they knew where I worked, so they reported me to the school where I worked. You know, phoned up the headmaster, or wrote to the headmaster, or whatever. So I was called in to give an account for myself for writing this article. And also, they found the book in the library. I'd underlined a couple of bits in pencil. So they said, you know, you've done this too. Oh, for goodness sake, who cares? Just underline a couple of bits in pencil in a library book. That's for nothing. Anyway, so I was called to account for this article. Various senior school staff expressed their view on the matter to me. And I basically said, look, nothing to do with you. And I actually think you probably agree with me on this issue. But so there we are. So David Williams wrote this book. And now we're here yet again. The people who uphold these values, who basically utterly reject a traditional understanding of sex, sexuality, and gender. How often is it turning out that they behave inappropriately, shall we say? Well, it's happening time and time again. So there is another one. So the school I worked at, I mean, do you still maintain that? Do you still think, you know, was I really right to criticize this man and his values? Well, it seems not. But here's an interesting little story, just another quick one while we're warming up here. That is the King of Norway, who you might not recognize. Anyway, that's the King of Norway, and is welcoming new citizens to Norway. So this is people who've done the citizenship process, passed the test, taken the vow or whatever, and he's welcoming them as Norwegian citizens. Well, it's a very nice thing to do. That sounds good. I don't know. There's probably too many people have been welcomed as citizens in the UK for the King to do that. But anyway, it seems a nice idea. But then the lady there, the Muslim lady there, won't shake his hand because her Muslim values must mean that, you know, you don't make physical contact with a man. And some people were making a big deal of this, saying, you know, this is really terrible, how disrespectful, how ungrateful, etc. So that was an interesting one. I had to think about that. What do I think about that? Would I want to be up in arms about this? I guess ultimately I would say not particularly. Not particularly. Okay, do I think that rule's necessary? Like to not shake the hand of you know, a woman shake the hand of a man? That's like too dangerous. People shouldn't do that. Do I think that's a sensible rule? No, I don't. I think it's completely over the top. But on the other hand, I can see what they're trying to do. I can understand why in Islam they take that sort of line. I think they take it far, far too far. But it is founded on a genuine concern. So the fact that this new citizen doesn't want to shake the King's hand, as long as she explains very politely, I would say not particularly a big deal. That there'll be much more important things I'd want to see. Is the person going to learn the language? and enter into the democratic process in a non-sectarian manner. So there'll be lots of other questions I'd want to ask of new citizens of Norway or any other country. But the fact that Our Lady doesn't want to shake the King's hand, well, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. As a quick fact came across today. Do you know what the rate of solving murders is in Scotland since 2013? Okay, what percentage of murders have been solved in Scotland since 2013? And the answer is 100%. Now, by solved, I think that means that the police think they've got the person, and then it goes to court. Now, whether the person might get convicted or not, I think that's not covered. This is the police's statistics. So as far as the police are concerned, they have solved 100% of murders in the last 12 or 13 years. So I'm just, congratulations to Police Scotland. But if any of you are thinking of committing a murder, I mean, Scotland is not the place to do it. I suggest you do it somewhere else, but the odds are not good of getting away with it in Scotland. I guess that's partly technology advancing. Obviously, when there's a murder, they throw everything they've got at it. Solving a murder, I mean, murdering someone's quite a sort of dramatic operation rather than just like stealing someone's phone out of the hand. There's probably a lot more evidence, a lot more to go on. But yeah, that's just plain good news, isn't it? So congratulations to Police Scotland, and long may it continue. And I hope a similar detection rate can expand to other crimes as well. All right, professional cynicalist. Oh, that's excellent. That's not a particularly cynical response either. That's just good news, isn't it? It's very good. There's an interesting little story here. Pete Wishart, SNP stalwart. So there have been anti-migrant hotel protests in Perth. Now, I've seen a bit of video footage. To be honest, I think some of them are pretty unsavory, sort of aggressive, loutish, foul-mouthed, intimidating behavior. Do I agree with their cause? Well, probably to some degree. Illegal immigration needs sorting out rather than putting people up in hotels, spending huge amounts of money on them, and basically allowing them to apply for asylum, often bogusly, and getting it. Yep, I'm completely against it all, and it needs sorting out. But on the other hand, I probably wouldn't want to associate myself with the crowd at this hotel. But Pete Wishart's got the answer, he thinks, in typical SNP style, and his answer is buffer zones. He said, how about we have buffer zones around asylum hotels? Now, Patrick Harvey, not too long ago, the Green Party, suggested we have buffer zones around assisted suicide facilities. I mean, and so it will go on. I mean, they can make them up wherever they like, I guess. But the suggestion you have a special law to stop this sort of protest, that's just wrong. You have laws to police and monitor, regulate protest activity. And you set your laws, and then your laws apply regardless of what that protest is. Regardless of the cause, you apply the same rules. But buffer zones don't. Buffer zones apply different rules according to what the cause is. Now, they claim it's not. They claim it's the location. But the location is obviously the place where people with a certain cause would want to go to protest. So instead of having a neutral law to regulate protests in general, they want specific laws to clamp down on the sort of protests that they don't like. And they'll formulate a case in order to back up that. So let's hope that goes nowhere. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the SNP passed something like that through. There's not time before the election. After the election, would they bother? Maybe they will. The whole UK will be a buffer zone for everything. Absolutely. Yeah, but that's the way it's heading, isn't it? The sort of protests that the government doesn't like, then that they'll ban them by buffer zones. So no asylum hotels, there will be no protests. I'm not sure about that, actually. I mean, let's say asylum hotels were all closed. What would happen to the asylum seekers and so-called asylum seekers? They'd just be put up in flats, which to my mind is probably even worse, because that's costing more money, and it's a more normal lifestyle. It's occupying a flat that someone else they won't be able to use. It's going to push up prices or make it harder to rent a flat. So I think the asylum hotels are a symptom of a serious problem, but I think maybe hotels are better than putting people in flats as well. Then if there is going to be any protests, at least it's at one location rather than like scattered around blocks of flats. So Yeah, not sure about that one. We'll get to the budget before too long. There's an interesting little graph I just saw today. Do you have a duty towards society to have children? Well, before we look at people's opinions, what's my attitude to that? I would say, if a couple are, man and woman fall in love, I would say they ought to get married and they ought to have children. Would I say they ought to have children? Yes, maybe that won't happen for any number of reasons. That's none of my business. But they ought to have children. I do feel it's a duty, and that's very much a neglected factor. All the talk now is about your choice. What would you like to do? What would benefit you? It's just entirely up to you. But I think there is a duty. I think as a Christian, I think that's part of Christian teaching. I think just in general, it is something built into our psyche as a duty towards procreation. Now, looking at that graph, it's interesting, isn't it? So the darkest red are the countries where they don't think you have a duty to have children, and the darker the green it is, then the more people do agree you've got a duty to have children. So basically, you can see there, more conservatively minded societies believe that there's a duty to have children. That will inevitably translate into statistics. They will have more children. That's what's going to happen. I don't know how strong the effect is, but there will obviously be some effect. Now, looking at that, can that value be changed? Well, yes, of course it can. Of course it can. Societies pass on their values to subsequent generations, but also those values are changed by all sorts of different factors as well. And those factors are human factors, so humans can influence those factors going forward. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed head on. That's what the Scottish Family Party does. We want to promote a culture of family life and to encourage married people, man and woman married, to have as many children as they would like to, which is often more than they actually do. So, interesting little graph. That's one, you've probably seen this image before. We use these images from time to time on social media, etc. We're considering using this image on our party election leaflet this year in the Scottish election. This leaflet will go to every household in Scotland, or almost all of them, because Royal Mail isn't always particularly reliable. So basically, about 2.8 million households will receive our leaflet, and a substantial part of the leaflet we are planning to devote to a fetus image like this and a pro-life message, which we think will be quite striking for people. It's not really what people expect from a party election leaflet, and we might use this image in our party election broadcast as well on television. So we hope that will be quite striking and thought-provoking to people. To people who are pro-life, obviously we hope it'll make them think, well, maybe I hadn't ought to vote pro-death. For people who just haven't given the issue much thought, it will grab their attention, and they'll read the couple of sentences, and it will make them think. It will make them think, and hopefully go exploring, go to our website, find out a bit more about the arguments, and hopefully be nudged along in the pro-life direction. That's the big thing we achieve in the election. We will reach every household in Scotland. We'll be on television. We'll reach hundreds of thousands of people with social media. I think it's worth considering. Some other organizations that are operating these sort of fields, they'll spend huge amounts of money in the election campaign in order to do things like advise their own supporters who to vote for, which really should take about 10 minutes because it's really easy to look at the party's policies. And the other thing that they'll be doing is they'll be contacting candidates, asking them for their views about things as well, which I think is, okay, it's not entirely without value, but it's nothing like as valuable as what we're going to do, which is going to be influencing public opinion and national debate. So we're not just communicating with our supporters. We're not just communicating with politicians and representatives of other parties. We're communicating with the general public. So it's a fantastic opportunity for us. Right, what's this? Denmark has stopped mail deliveries because less sending letters. You have to drop off, collect. Yeah, I'd heard that actually. So the post basically doesn't exist in Denmark. So instead of there being a post box, you take things like a parcel to the post office or whatever, and they go like that. Will we be heading the same way? Very possibly, because mail is decreasing in volume so significantly. All right, quick mention for Iran. It's interesting, there's some pro-independence social media accounts have disappeared after the Iran internet turn off. That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, sometimes when I hear people say, these are bots from Iran or Russia or whatever, I'm often quite skeptical. I think, well, are they really? I don't know. But obviously they are. I mean, a substantial number of these are, which is quite interesting. So obviously the Iranian regime was quite keen on Scottish independence. Now, do you conclude that from that the Scottish independence is a bad thing? No. That's not a logical conclusion. Just because bad people support it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But it's just interesting to note in any case. And is it right? Is the SNP government, which is associated with the Scottish nationalist movement, are they more aligned with Iran? Well, yes, I'd say they are. I mean, what's John Swinney had to say since the protests have erupted in Iran? Well, on Twitter, he said nothing. He jumps into every issue going, giving his, pontificating his view on it. But protests in Iran, nothing to say. Nothing whatsoever. So why is that? Because I think John Swinney thinks, right, so it's all about tribal identity. So John Swinney thinks, who's in my tribe? Well, we're independents, and Muslims, I think. We get all the Muslim votes, don't we? We've got Humza Yousaf. He plays the Muslim card all the time. So SNP, we're Muslims are part of our tribe. So Iran, they're Muslims, aren't they? So if there's people opposing Muslims, I guess we I don't know, we can't sort of be on their side, can we? So we'll just shut up. Humza Yousaf put things out where he said, basically Iranian regime is terrible, but then it's straight on to seems to be criticizing America and Israel, just the usual lines. I find that very concerning that they approach this not from the point of view of right and wrong, they approach it from the point of view of who's on our tribe and who's not. And as far as John Swinney is for the SNP concerned, the people fighting for their freedom against the murderous regime in Iran, well, they're not part of the SNP's tribe. It doesn't line up with their tribal instincts, so they've got nothing to say. Which I think is appalling. The people approach these sort of basically blatantly moral issues. Instead of approaching it from a moral standpoint, what's right and what's wrong, they approach it from and say, who's in our tribe and who's not? Whose allegiances sort of line up with our allegiances and whose don't. So pretty grim. Right, this is an interesting point, I think. Soon the same people who are criticizing Trump for ignoring international law in South America are indirectly pushing for the USA to attack Iran. Absolutely. Very good point. Very good point. I said about Trump and Venezuela, did I think that was the right thing? Complicated situation, very possibly, depending on what comes next. But I think Iran, absolutely justified. I mean, I would also say it's almost a moral imperative for any nation with the capacity to intervene in Iran to do so. So I would be delighted to see America intervene in some way and help the protesters and for the regime to be toppled, the murderous regime to be toppled. And yes, exactly the same people who are normally saying Venezuela really bad will be calling for it here. But then the extreme left won't be supporting it. Because the extreme left, again, Islam is sort of supposed to be on their side. Whatever America does must be bad. Iran are enemies of Israel. Israel is the ultimate source of all evil because they're Jews. So if Iran hates Israel, they're Jews. That means Iran must be quite good. But this is the sort of thinking. This is the thing that goes on in Jeremy Corbyn's head or Humza Yousaf's head, maybe in John Swinney's head as well. But yeah, I hope that America does intervene at the earliest opportunity. I think the campaign against Grok is obviously politically motivated. They've seized on a chink in the armor of Grok. I'm sure people are not making things up. I'm sure there are problems, but there are lots of other social media platforms and AI systems as well. So it's transparently obvious that they're just trying to have a go at X because they feel it's out of their control. So a lot of progressive left-wing governments, they hate X because it's not submitting to the sort of censorship that they would like. And therefore, the other social media platforms are tending not to either. So they want to get back at it. So let's see. I would hope that fails. I'm sure whatever problems there are with Grok producing sexual image or whatever, I'm sure they can be fixed. And it's quite a narrow issue to deal with. But the Lib Dems are the worst. They're culture warriors of the worst type. I mean, it's as though they're standing for election against Donald Trump and Elon Musk. They haven't really, I mean, what have they got to say about mainstream UK political issues? I mean, they're just like the Labour Party, basically. So they haven't really got much to say. But they grandstand about world issues, trying to play on people's strong opinions about Trump, basically, which I don't think is real politics in Britain. It's not very creative. Do share the live stream if you can. We'll get to the budget very, very soon. It's a quick one from Donald Trump here. He's pointing out the rate of welfare use in Minnesota by Yemenis. Somalians. So massively higher rates of welfare dependency. Well, that's quite interesting. What would you make of that? Now, Trump sort of tweeted this without comment. There have been some issues in Minnesota with massive fraud, like billions of dollars of fraud through the COVID period, the COVID relief system in America by Somalians. So there's a lot of attention on them. But if you have immigrants to your nation from a poor country, is it likely that they'll be on benefits 5 years, 10 years down the line? Is it more likely? If you take in just a cross section of people from a very poor country, then yes, basically that is likely to happen, because they're coming with poor English language, probably a poor level of education, massive cultural differences. So they're going to find it hard to settle in and get on. So you'd expect very much higher rates of welfare support. Now, it would be perfectly reasonable to say, well, if you don't want that, then don't let people like that in. People who are going to find it difficult to get a foot on the career ladder and be looking after themselves. Don't let those people in. Or if you do let them in, you really want a system to be encouraging them and enabling them to become self-sufficient rather than settling into welfare dependency. Because welfare dependency in a rich country can be a far higher standard of living than working your socks off doing something in a very poor country. So that really needs looking at. I mean, some people will be looking at that and say, oh, that's terrible, that's racist, whatever, Donald Trump putting this out. I think it's a reasonable thing to point out, but then it needs thinking about as to what needs to be done about it in the future to prevent it happening again, if that's the goal, or to move people on from this situation. I think one of the things probably is dispersal as well. If you have large communities growing, diaspora communities will tend to all be speaking the same language to each other and not really integrating. That really limits economic opportunities. And maybe that's happening with this group as well. Okay. One thing to stop the regime leaves a dangerous vacuum. Absolutely. I've read a bit about various revolutions in history. And basically, the people who create the revolution are very often not the people who end up in charge of the country. So sometimes there's quite a positive group or quite an amorphous movement united against the current regime. Then the current regime goes and it collapses into infighting or civil war, and you end up with the most ruthless and brutal of the competing factions being in charge of the country. I mean, that's what happened with Soviet Russia, or French Revolution, or whatever. That's quite commonly what happens. So the results are unpredictable. You're absolutely right to say that. Blow from Nigel Rogers, reform hits 9-month low in polls. I thought this was coming. I've been saying this, probably you've heard me say this before. I thought this was coming. And it's tricky for reform because they put so much store in, we've got the momentum. Look, we're going up and up. We're the ones on the march. We're the ones momentum's the big word, isn't it? But now they're going down a bit in the polls. That really seems to be a sort of sustained effect. So what you say when you've been spending months saying, oh, look, we're the ones with all the momentum, when you're now going down and the Conservatives are coming up a little bit, well, you maybe regret some of the things you've been saying. I think reform have overreached. Like in the response to the budget, when they came out and said, we're going to make foreigners pay the bill. I think to most people, that doesn't sound great. It sounds a bit simplistic, a bit populist or whatever. So I think reform have maybe been overstepping the mark in some regards and just repelling some more middle of the road voters. And that's why the Conservatives are coming up a little bit. So I think some of these Conservatives who've defected to reform, they've maybe done it a bit too soon. Maybe in a year or two, they'll be thinking, what to do that for? Conservatives are polling higher now. Can I defect back again? Will the Conservatives have me back? So interesting times. The other thing I say with reform is, if I was in reform, I would be really annoyed by this. I mean, I'm not trying to sow dissent in reform. I am really. If I was in reform, because if you defect from another party, almost always the Conservatives, you're a superstar immediately in reform. You're on the stage, you're given a public profile, and you're a major figure in reform because you used to be a Conservative. If you've joined reform, and it doesn't matter how talented and brilliant you are not a public figure. You're not a major personality within reform. It's like there's no pathway for people to join reform and rise to prominence within it. It just isn't there. It isn't there, which I think is a big problem for them. I think it's going to bite them in the longer term. So Nazim Zahawi joined reform. People are up in arms about this because he was really big on pushing vaccine mandates, etc., and he's pretty left-wing in some of his views. This was his tweet from years ago. I'm not British-born, Mr. Nigel Farage, and I'm as British as you are. Your comments are offensive and racist. I would be frightened to live in a country run by you. I mean, frankly, Nadim, I mean, they're ridiculous things to say. I mean, scaremongering, totally unjustified. But I'm sure I would think to myself, as soon as I'd written that, I would think, right, okay, that's I've burnt my bridges with reform. I couldn't possibly go and join a Nigel Farage party, having said that. But it seems increasingly these days, it's the same with Donald Trump. People will say the most extreme things about someone, dogmatic and extreme things, then a few years later just going to completely the opposite direction, completely contradict them. And it's as though now it doesn't matter. People just assume, oh, the fact that someone said something in the strongest possible terms, well, so what? That was a couple of years ago. So what difference should that make? I mean, really, if he said this, he needs to explain very carefully why he said it at the time and why he's changed his mind. But the response instead tends to be, oh, that was a long time ago, whatever, don't worry about it. But no, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. I think it's reflective of a decay in the standards of integrity expected of politicians. If you make a forthright declaration of personal principle and then just contradict it later, well, you've got questions to answer. I mean, for starters, are you a total hypocrite? Are you just an opportunist? But it seems often people don't need to answer these. Right, let's jump to the budget. Here we go. This is a headline. More Scots will pay less income tax than if they lived elsewhere in the UK. We've heard this time and time again. Sweeney was saying it as well. I think the previous post might have been about that. So they've changed a couple of the tax thresholds in the budget. So the threshold for 19 pence on the pound has gone up 7.4%. And the threshold for going from 20% to 21% has gone up by 7.4% as well. So the thresholds of the lower rates have gone up a bit. The thresholds for the higher rates stay the same. So effectively, that's increased taxes for higher taxpayers and decreased them slightly for lower rate taxpayers. But the thing is, the SNP crows, most people pay less tax in Scotland. The media dutifully regurgitate this factoid repeatedly. More people pay less tax in Scotland. But let's have a look at the look at the story. This is one of many. The tax changes will help me to manage my household budget. Do you know how much they'll save him per month? They will save this person. It gives his salary, etc. The changes in the budget will save this person under £1 a month. He will be under £1 a month better off. And the headline is, tax changes will help me manage my household budget. Which is though the SNP have written the headline, isn't it? So this is the figure. So if you earn £15,000, you will be £24 a year better off in Scotland. So £2 a month, 50 pence a week, under 50 pence a week. Okay. If you earn 20,000 or £25,000 a year, you will be £40 a year better off. Okay. So basically 31,000. So we're getting up towards the median salary there. You'd be £2 a month better off. Okay. And therefore, pretty well everyone above the median, you can pay substantially more in tax, like thousands of pounds more in tax. Now you can see what the SNP have done. They've rigged this to try to make it so they can say most people pay less tax while also hammering higher earners. And the media are so compliant, they just keep parroting this line that people pay less tax in Scotland, but it is a trivial, absolutely trivial amount. I mean, I'd love to see that man's household budgets to see where this 90 pence a month has helped him in his spreadsheet to manage his household budget. I really cannot imagine. So, it's right. Churchill changed parties. He did indeed. Yeah, I've got nothing against people changing parties. But if you change parties having said things like diametrically opposed to the policies and personalities of the party you're aligning with, then there really needs to be some explaining done about it, I think. Right, for the budgets, what else we've got? Breakfast clubs for all primary and special school pupils. So, so she said, this will mean the morning rush to get everyone out of the house will be that little bit earlier. Now, left-wing governments basically want to take over the parenting role. They want children to be in state childcare for as long as possible and parents to be off earning money. That's what they want. And generally, so right-wing politicians often want the parents out earning money as well, because then they go and pay tax. So for the left-wing, it's a matter of equality. We want the state doing everything because then it's equal. And we want men and women the same. For the right-wing, it's just we want them out earning. We say neither. No, that's not true. We want children to be with their parents if that's what the parents want, and it normally is. So you see this, the assumption is that every home in Scotland has got two working parents, and their main mission in the morning is to get rid of the kids as soon as possible so they can get on with the important parts of the day, like going to work. But that's just not the case with a lot of parents. A lot of parents, let's say, mum's going to be at home all day because you've got 3 kids to look after. Maybe they're homeschooling even. So they're not in a rush, but they have to pay the tax to provide this service for the twin income family or whoever, the parents who want to work more. So yet again, the parent who wants to be at home with the children is penalised, and the money's taken off them in order to provide childcare for the couple where both want to work, for the couple who've already got far more money because they've got 2 incomes. So that's just typical family policy. You get the same from the Conservatives as well. Right, international aid budget has been increased. Right, what do I think about that? Well, I think Scotland shouldn't have an international aid budget because it's a reserved matter and it is just not in the remit of the Scottish Parliament to deal with international aid. Now, the concept of international aid, I mean, one of my reservations with it is I think often it doesn't work. It creates a dependency culture. It's like happens in Scotland. If you have international aid, then who gets rewarded? The people who can fill the form in best and make the best application, use all the buzzwords. And so people who become really adept at that will get the money. So if your project looks a bit, feminist, LGBT friendly, climate change, whatever, then you'll get the aid. If you just a common or garden, look up, there's no doctors, people are really ill and they can't get enough food. Well, that's a bit boring, isn't it? That's not a very attractive project. Yeah, I think the reliance engendered in poorer countries can be very harmful to their development as well. But I think international aid in emergency situations can be very valuable. So I'm not against international aid in general, just it's not the Scottish Government's job. So I think that shouldn't be there at all. But social care workers to receive the real living wage. Right, would I like care workers to be paid a decent wage? Well, yes, I would. I think they do a vital work, and I think often they're pretty saintly in the way that they go about it, sometimes in quite trying situations with sometimes not the easiest clients, shall we say. So, yeah, very, very valuable work. But in declaring that in the budget, who's going to pay? That's the critical thing. So for someone who's receiving private care at home, that just means they're going to have a higher bill. So the carer will be paid a bit more, but the person maybe won't be able to afford as much care or is going to have to pay more for it. But then when it comes to council-provided care, state-provided care, again, that's just going to impose more of a burden on the taxpayer to pay for it. So, nice idea, but the way these things are reported is just like this is an unqualified good news story. Obviously, this is a good thing. What could possibly be wrong? But there's another side to it. And that needs to be considered as well. But this is BBC reporting. Doesn't even consider the other side of the story. Basically, the government scores points by spending money and giving people more stuff, and that's the game. So as far as the BBC is concerned, they look at the budget and they score the budget according to who they think the money ought to have been given to. They don't score it on the basis of what are the wider effects of that going to be. So higher pay for social care workers, yes, I'd be delighted to see that, but there's more to it than just declaring a pay increase and then leaving it to other people to work out how that's going to work out. There needs to be a lot more thinking behind that. Aid as a fashion statement. Yes, I agree. I think it's a virtue signalling thing. The Scottish government think it's well worth a few £1 million to be able to go around talking about it and go and visit the place and have your photograph taken and look like a world leader and look very generous, etc. If the SNP want to increase foreign aid, they've got lots of MPs. Well, they haven't got that many actually, but they've got a few MPs in the House of Commons. They could push it there. Right, why aren't the other parties, as well as the media, pointing this out about the tax changes? It is appalling. If you look at the headlines, I think the one I got was BBC. STV had the same sort of headline as well. And it's just like cut and paste straight from the SNP's social media account. And I don't know, it's Scottish politics. Often there is not much scrutiny of what goes on, and they're allowed to get away with just parroting these phrases, despite the fact there's not much behind them. Right, next thing with the budget, 10% increase in college funding. Now, college funding's been squeezed in Scotland over the years. It's not an issue I follow particularly closely, but there have been a lot of complaints from the further education sector saying really they're in dire straits because their funding's been cut and they're struggling to provide anything like a reasonable service. So from my limited knowledge of the area, I'm pleased to see college funding bounce back a little bit. I think further education colleges have got a very important role. I hope that they're focusing on vocational qualifications. It's some academic in some cases, but vocational qualifications. I hope they're not like personal interest courses. I hope there are not huge numbers of places for types of courses that people might enjoy, but there's not really a career and there's not really work in those areas. But I think most of the courses are vocationally focused. So pleased to see that. Okay, fine, good. 1.5 billion to be saved through efficiencies of part of public sector reform. Right, if you can save 1.5 billion pounds in efficiencies, I would, whoever was in charge last year, I would fire them. I mean, that's outrageous. If there's 1.5 billion pounds being wasted by the thing basically being poorly run, and whoever was in charge last year, they should just be for the chop. And this new person, well done for identifying all of these savings. Oh, hang on a minute. It was the SNP in charge last year and the year before and the year before and the year before. I mean, that should be a pretty embarrassing admission, shouldn't it? Oh, we've just realised we've been wasting 1.5 billion pounds a year, and we're now going to save that. You just can't say that if you've been in the government for almost 20 years. But I say accountability is not the strong point in Scottish politics. Right, travelling by private jet in Scotland will be taxed. Well, that's not going to hit me particularly personally, probably not you as well. What do I think about that? I think basically this is a sop to the Greens rather. It's the sort of thing that creates the right headlines for people who are so hard left, hyper environmentally minded. What do I think about it? I would imagine there's taxes on private jet journeys around the world. It's just a matter of what level they will be at. On the one hand, do you want extremely wealthy people coming to Scotland? Yes, I do. Do I want them coming on holiday? Do I want them coming for business purposes? Any other purposes? Yes, absolutely. That's very valuable for the Scottish economy. They'll probably come and spend an absolute fortune or make very important business deals, etc. So do I want wealthy people coming? Yes. Some sort of tax on private jet flights. I mean, these things cost an absolute arm and a leg. In any case, probably adding a small tax wouldn't make much difference. So as long as this tax is not such that it makes people think, oh, it's fine, I won't bother going. I'm not going to go to Scotland. After all, I'll go somewhere else. Then, okay, I'm not particularly opposed to it. I mean, in terms of carbon emissions, obviously private jet flights are pretty disastrous. Am I bothered about that? In the grand scheme of things, it would be a drop. I remember a statistic I heard that if all air travel was stopped, just 100%, no aeroplane took to the skies ever again, by the year 2100, that would have delayed climate change by 3 weeks. That's quite, in other words, it's like putting this drop in the ocean stuff. So basically, I don't have a strong opinion on it. If they want to put a small tax on private jet flights, fine. If they want to make it a huge tax for political and ideological purposes, then I think that could backfire majorly. We want wealthy people coming to Scotland. It's a problem with the media commenting that they're bound by an editorial viewpoint. Oh, that's an interesting comment, Robert. I would have thought, I don't know, it's just so obvious. I mean, it is part of the issue that we always hear that journalists in Scotland are in a hurry, that they're overworked, they're trying to run newspapers, etc. They're understaffed and they're under pressure. So they're just going to get the story out. So they hear a straightforward black and white factual statement from the SNP. More people, 55% of people pay less tax in Scotland. And they just pass on the headline. I sometimes find it, I don't know what the reason is. There's another one later on as well. Here it is. It's right here. This headline was reproduced across the media in Scotland after the budget. Scottish child payment boosted to £40 a week for babies. The Scottish child payment will be boosted for families with a baby under the age of 1 to £40 a week. What does that sound like to you? That sounds like families with a baby under 1 are going to get £40 a week. That's what it says, isn't it? Is that true? No, it's not true. The Scottish child payment is not for families with babies. It's for families with babies, and when those families are on other benefits, are in receipt of other benefits. So basically, it's for very low income families. By families, it means single parents as well. So it's actually for people on benefits. But the headlines are totally misleading. And it's not just in one publication, it's in one after another. There's they just cut and paste the SNP's press release and on it goes. Now, Family Party point of view, giving more money to parents in the first year of the life of their babies. Yes, that's the sort of thing we're behind. We like that sort of policy. Now, if you've got, this would be, basically it'd be single mums that have been targeted. I mean, let's be realistic about it. So a single mum, do want the single mum to not be too worried about money and to be able to focus on being a good mum, giving the child the best start in life under the circumstances. So a bit more financial security. Okay, fine. That's good. Our policies tend to be focused more on all mothers. We want all parents to feel supported, to be able to make their own decisions, whereas the SNP's focus tends to be on low-income parents. So, for example, maternity pay, we would make maternity pay available to every mother. Real maternity pay, instead of maternity pay meaning payments to mums who used to have a job just before they had the baby. That's what it means at the moment. If you had a job a few weeks ago, the government pays you to be a mum. If you didn't have a job, for example, because you were looking after other young kids, then you don't get maternity pay, which is totally wrong, and we would fix that. Oxfam. It's interesting to hear who the BBC gets commenting on the budget. It's all charities and activist organisations. It's not business organisations or anything like that. Charities and activists. So Oxfam says the private jet tax should be sky high. So that's the, what's it called? The Oxford's something or other about famine relief. Is that what it was about originally? Famine relief? Tax on private jet flights? I mean, Oxfam is one of those charities that it is a charity in much of what it does. It performs charitable functions in a traditional sense, helping people in a practical way. But a major part of their activity is just being left-wing political campaigners. And it's a real shame that this happens. It tends to be the thing with left-wing politics, doesn't it? It just tends to take over various areas that ought to be politically neutral. And then they end up thinking that promoting a left-wing view is compatible with their role. But I think for a charity, it's not. So Oxfam, don't want to know. You discredit yourselves as a charity by being left-wing political campaigners. Right, education, another thing from the budget. Scotland's teachers might be scratching their heads that there was little mentioning in Robison's speech about boosting their numbers. This is BBC report. Teaching unions are balancing for strike action because they say the government has failed to meet a manifesto pledge to cut class contact time by 90 minutes a week and grow the teaching workforce. Right, let's look at those things. Grow the teaching workforce. The SNP has been promising this for years. But the question's got to be asked now, why? Because pupil numbers are declining rapidly from the bottom up. So nursery, P1, P2, these are now showing the effect of demographic decline. So the number of primary schools needed, unfortunately for primary school teachers, the number of teachers needed is going to decline and decline. And then that's going to go up through the system. Eventually that will be hitting high schools as well. So to be promising increased teacher numbers in this context isn't particularly sensible. But the unions are going to hold them to it. And the SNP is the sort of government that will probably recruit a load of teachers just for the sake of keeping the unions happy and saying they've fulfilled their pledge. What they need to be doing is saying, actually, we don't need increasing teacher numbers. We thought we did. Actually, we don't. We're going to have to try and aim for the number that we need. Another thing, cutting class contact time. This is the way things are drifting in lots of areas. 4-day week, less teaching, basically less work for the same money, or less work for more money, or the same work for more money. I mean, this is basically what unions are all about, isn't it? And the Scottish government just loves to pander to these things. And then it prides itself on the way it's basically being less efficient at spending taxpayers' money. They're talking about efficiency savings, but then saying that basically going to pay teachers to do less work. My view, teachers haven't taught in the state schools. Well, there are a lot of teachers who've taught in state schools. I think the central issue for teachers in state schools is not really overwork, it's bad behavior in class. If the pupils were angelic, or as close to that as is reasonable to expect, I think you find most teachers would say their job would just be a joy. And they would be delighted with it. Okay, there might be some other things, some pressure points, whatever. But I think they'd say that would be the central thing. All right, the environment. Again, this is from the BBC. There's some good news in the budget for the planet, says the unbiased BBC. I mean, that is not reporting. The BBC should not be saying that. But environmental campaigners are saying it's not enough. Well, surprise, surprise. Although an income-generating move, the tax on private jets will likely result in fewer aircraft landings at Scotland's airports carrying just a handful of passengers. Well, I hope not. If it does do that, that is a major own goal for Scotland, because you're keeping rich people away. And rich people, surprisingly, have a lot of money, and they spend it. And they make big business deals. Anyway, the greenhouse gas emissions from these flights per person are huge compared with scheduled flights. It's estimated there are 12,000 private air trips made each year. Okay. It says money for nature restoration has been tripled, although the pot was plundered in 2024 to pay government pay settlements, which set back expansion of the tree planting sector. So you see here that they're constantly giving in to unions and giving pay deals, and that's where the money is going. So they'll talk about all their environmental priorities, but at the end of the day, keeping the unions happy, just pay people more to keep them happy is what they do. That's unsustainable. It's interesting, though, isn't it? I mean, tree planting schemes. If you just leave a piece of ground, does it not normally end up covered in trees on its own? I would say generally that is what tends to happen. So sometimes I wonder about these schemes. And right, that G.K. Chesterton thing, where you put up an umbrella to keep the rain off, and then water your flowers with a watering can. If you want to grow trees grow naturally. If you just leave a piece of land, give it 10 or 20 years, it will be covered in trees. So this idea of tree planting programs are a big expense. I'm not sure about it. I'm sure there's a lot of people claiming that their service that they're charging for is very important, but I'm not at all sure. Right. Liam, Oxfam, just a Green Party policy and echo it. I've had adverts on Facebook in the last few months pretty much echoing Green Party policy word for word. Yes, absolutely. Wonder where Oxfam get their money from. Because normally when charities go down this route, it's normally a reflection that they're not getting their money from the public anymore. They're getting the money from government grants. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case with Oxfam. They're conducting various projects for the government, or they've got contracts to deliver various things on behalf of the government. And then that tends to be the way things are happening there. Right, that's the things on the budget. A few more things quickly. Australia's social media ban for under 16s has come into force. The Conservatives have promised it in the UK. We've talked about it in the Family Party. We've definitely gone for a ban for under 14s. Whether we go for under 16s, we're uncertain about that for the time being. We shall see. We shall see. Saturday, Scottish Parliament, 1:30 till 3. Do come along if you can. This is not a Family Party event, but I will be speaking at it, and it's very much in line with our policies and priorities. Family Rally for Educational Freedom. And basically, it's about the government's pressure on home education and independent schools. So the government is trying to basically force everyone towards going to a state school by making it financially difficult, to regulatory problems for independent schools, and then also regulatory threats to home education as well. Whereas we think parents should be free to home educate, and the government's job should be to support them in lots of ways in doing that. And independent schools, again, should be supported and funded even by the government rather than pressurized and bled dry. So do come along to that if you can. Saturday, 1:30 till 3. I haven't looked at the weather forecast, but let's be optimistic. And also, as we move into our election campaign year, come and join us at one of these events. I wouldn't say these are like election campaign launches. It's a bit early for that. But it will be a chance to hear about our election campaign plans and to get them on board with that and hear what's all be going on in these localities. So do come along in Biggar, Irvine, Edinburgh, Duns, Dundee, Bishopbriggs, Motherwell, and Fife. There's further details on our social media. There will also be meetings in Inverness, Aberdeen, and other places as well, going further into February. But these are the ones for January. Let's say, so the focus of these meetings will be, right, this is the big year, this is our plans, this is what we're thinking of doing, party election broadcast, maybe we'll have a draft leaflet to show you, meet our candidates, and we'll explain our plans, the sort of messages we're going to try and put forward in the election campaign as well. So it's our big year, so come along and hear about what we're going to be doing, bring people along too, and it'd be great to see you. I'm planning on being at all of those events, all being well, and there'll be other members of the Family Party leadership team there as well. So hope you can make it. I talked about that a bit last year, I think. Now this was an interesting one, just as we're finishing off. A proportion of 15-year-old boys surveyed in 2021 to 2022 who reported having used cannabis at least once in their lifetime. Okay. So there's different nations there. That's very small on my screen. I can't actually read them. But I can tell you which one's at the far right with the highest percentage, 23%, and that is Scotland. I think that is very, very concerning. There's lots of research about the negative effects of cannabis, but I've seen it firsthand on lots of people. People use cannabis often. They're, come on, don't be so old-fashioned or whatever. Nothing wrong with it. It's fine. It's cool. You're so uptight about it. Then the next thing you know, you've got someone with mental health problems, can't quite get their life into gear, dropping out of one thing or another, can't really hold the job down, and just basically being a burden on the state. Their own life is quite sad. They're not fulfilling their potential in any way, and they also become a burden on friends and relatives as well. So if you've got 23% of 15-year-olds saying they've already tried cannabis, I mean, goodness knows what the percentage is by the time you got up to 21, say. So this is a serious problem in Scotland. The government's approach to it, well, hey, we're cool. It's not like it's smoking tobacco. Smoking tobacco is really bad because that's something that old people do. That's really unhealthy. That's terrible. We're going to stamp that out. But cannabis, hey, that's cool because it's got a bit more of a youth vibe and maybe a bit of an ethnic minority vibe. So let's be pretty chilled about cannabis, and let the kids at school know. Well, it's not really that big a deal, but maybe you just want to be a bit careful with it in this way or that way. But it's the stigma that's the real issue. The real issue is people like me saying, this is wrong, don't do it because it's harmful. That just generates stigma. So if the government could just deal with people like me who say, don't take illegal drugs, that's a bad choice. You ought not to do that. They think if they could just deal with people like me, then, well, we'll be home and dry. So very concerning. Drugs education in school, I would revolutionize it. The family party would revolutionize it from its current, hey kids, we know you're going to take drugs. That's cool by us, but there's just a few things you need to know about it to keep you a little bit safer about it. That message would be out of the window if we were in charge. Let's just remind of the Scottish drugs death statistics. Scotland on the left in the blue. The dark red is the EU average. I mean, that really is shocking, isn't it? The level of drug deaths in Scotland. This shows the age of people dying of drug abuse as well. It's not younger people generally. It's people in middle-aged people who probably started taking drugs, I don't know, this was train spotting era. It was extra cool. And they're now dying of it. Last couple of minutes. 2025, leading cause of death worldwide was abortion, 73 million. Just before I came on here, I saw John Swinney had retweeted something that said, we are standing up, we're protecting the tiniest members of our society. I mean, how can he retweet that without realizing how ridiculous he's being? I'll put that on social media later. I didn't have time to include it in this broadcast. I thought that was a good image. Did you see that one? From in the snow about a week ago. Royal Mail van, billions of items delivered safely and securely, and it's gone off in the snow into a ditch. So that was just unlucky, but quite funny all the same. So I hope the driver was okay. This has been on my list to mention in the live stream, and I haven't got to it for a long time. But here it is. This is showing the fairly dramatic decline in the number of young people, this is in America, but it's the same in Britain, I think, who are declaring that they're transgender or non-binary. So the purple line at the top is transgender, and you can hear it was going like 2021 to 2024, is it? And then non-binary is the greeny coloured line. So pretty dramatic decline. But this is shown here as well, is the proportion of young people reporting anxiety, depression, whatever. This is declining quite quickly as well in America. And I suggest both of these are due to basically a change in culture, a change in fashion, if you like. So I think transgenderism is going out of fashion to a degree. So let's, long may it continue. Now, I've just got 1 minute. I think there was one slide I skipped over just back here with John Swinney. Oh, no, I'll tell you one last thing, actually. One last thing to tell you. I mean, John Mason, SNP MP, SNP MSP, rather. He's standing out of the next election. He was in the SNP. He was basically kicked out of the SNP because he wasn't anti-Semitic enough. He wouldn't describe the situation in Gaza as a genocide. He was very balanced in his view, but the SNP threw him out. So John Mason made after a New Year's message. And remarkably, do you know what he says in it? He says, vote SNP in May. He said the SNP are the only party which will stand up for Scotland, so vote SNP. Can you understand a person that gets thrown out of a party for a completely unjustified reason? So John Mason has been thrown out of the SNP for making a perfectly reasonable statement. He's been hounded and criticised and ridiculed within the SNP for years because of his socially conservative views. So they expel him, and he still says, I think you ought to vote for the SNP, they're the best party. They're the only party that will stand up for Scotland. Can you make sense of that? I really can't. I think that defies scientific explanation. Fascinating, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating that someone will still be you're loyal to their party, even when they've been treated like that, even though the faults of the party have been exposed so plainly to him, is still loyal to them. How strange. If anyone's got any answers on a postcard on that one, because it's not making any sense to me. Right, thank you for joining me for this hour. Thanks for watching, and those of you who are watching later as well. Most people watch the live stream later rather than live. But next week and the weeks going forward, we'll have some guests on, and there will be lots of issues to talk about, and we'll talk more about our election preparations as well. So thanks for watching, and good night.